So I think pretty much all of you have heard of rat lungworm by now and know a little bit about it, and possibly saw this recently in the news. This was Janie Kim, one of Rob Cowie's graduate students who did this study. It was a number of years ago. Maybe, I think she did it in 2011 or 12. And looking at how expansive is rat lungworm across the Hawaiian island chain. And it is on every island. It's actually been, it was first recognized in Hawaii in the late 1959 and 1960. There were a couple cases on Oahu. The two people actually died of it. There was really good research for a while. It fell off, it dropped off the radar, and then it cropped up again on the Big Island in particular, back around the millennium, the turn of the millennium. So this paper really talks about, with climate change, the range of this parasite is expected to expand. It's not just on Hawaii, it's also on the US mainland. They find it all the way from Florida through the Gulf Coast states to Texas. Its range is expanding up into Oklahoma and Tennessee. And so they're looking at the fact that with warming climates and that type of thing, we're going to see this expand. It will expand up as far as on Hawaii Island. It's going to expand into the upper elevations. And so this is particularly worrying for some of our farmers who are growing crops up at higher elevations. This came out not very long ago either. And Scott Enright, who's the head of the Department of Ag, said, this disease is, this problem, this parasite, this disease is really going to impact Hawaii farmers. We're going to see 20 to 30% of farmers go out of business because of this problem. We've got the new food safety laws that will be coming into effect, and it's really going to impact Hawaii farmers. The standards, the regulations are all changing. And to me, this is really sad because I'm a big supporter of local agriculture. I'm a big supporter of school gardens. I've always grown a garden. I taught my kids how to grow gardens, and I prefer to eat locally grown food. I still do. So to me, it's sad to see that this problem has gone unaddressed for so many years. In 2000, around 2000 to 2005, some studies were done showing that of 83 cases of meningitis, 24 of those were attributed to rat lungworm disease. We started having outbreaks on Hawaii Island. Researchers looked at rats. 100% of the rats they were looking at in the Puna area were infected. 78% of the semi-slugs, which was a new invasive arrival, were infected, and they were carrying higher parasite loads than CDC had seen anywhere. And what happened, we took empirical evidence, scientific evidence of infection rates, and it got twisted around to that this was a lifestyle disease. This was because you grew your own food and you didn't wash it properly. And so that problem has now blown up. We did studies not very long ago, about a year and a half ago. We looked at the range of the semi-slug, which now we see it's all the way from Kailua down to Honaunau. It's all the way from Puna up to, at that time, O'Okala. It's now down in Waipio Valley. And there's a very good chance that the horses, the wild horses down there, if you've seen the recent news about the horses, that is probably what is getting them. They took tissue samples, CSF, cerebrospinal fluid, and serum, and sent it to our lab for testing. And so we'll find out what's happening with that. But to me, this is really sad for Hawaii farmers because we grow great food here. I love what we grow here. It's so diverse and it's so delicious. And how does it affect the school garden programs? These are my students. This was me back in 2008 as the science mass kumu for Kanu o Ka'aina. We were the sustainability hui, and we made compost, we grew food. The students loved the garden. I had students that were able to go into really great programs. I had a student who was in a foster home, and she got to go to Ma'o Farms and have a scholarship to Leeward Community College because she loved the garden. And so to me, the garden is just a great resource for students. It's a safe place for teachers that are not used to taking their kids outside of the classroom, to take them outside and still be within the school grounds. Shortly after I was at Kumu here, my son came down with this, and he was one of the people that went into a coma and almost died of it, and that's how I got involved in this work. So we've had principals say we should shut down the school gardens, it's too dangerous. And what we say to them is they can go home and get this. They can get this anywhere. The better thing to do is to get the kids involved. So Dr. Pressler, before she retired recently, she said, we have everybody that possibly is working on this disease, working on it with us. Anybody who has anything to offer is part of the effort. I said, well, what about getting the kids involved? And I've been saying that since 2011. So at the 2011 conference here in Honolulu, the second international conference, we had attendees from 6 countries there. And at the end of the conference, the last few hours, we all had to list our priorities of what we thought were important things to do, what we needed to do as an international community to address this disease. And one of the things that we talked about was the fact that in rural communities, it's very hard to educate people. This is what the Department of Health said, you know, they have locked gates, barking dogs, speaking different languages. And so some of us who are educators said, well, what about putting it into the K-12 school and having it be STEM education? So this was actually voted on as a priority. Now, some of the participants were the CDC, the Department of Health, the Hawaii Department of Health, CTAR was there, PBARC was there, UH Manoa was there, and Dr. Jarvie and I were there. And Dr. Jarvie and I did not know each other at the time, but I brought my son and she saw how serious this was and she took it on herself and now has become one of the actually world leading experts on this. So that's what we said, let's put it into the K-12 schools. It's great education. You can design all kinds of great math and science around it. So one of our first efforts was this second grade activity book, which probably a lot of you might have seen. It's been used in school garden programs. It was, we worked with a woman, Pascal Pinner, who was Science Teacher of the Year. She won a Teacher of the Year award. We worked with second grade teachers at 4 different schools, and we developed this book that's kind of, you know, it's fun, it's a story, it's a mystery, and it teaches the basics of rat lungworm disease education. It has the life cycle in it. It has this check, clean, cook, how to prevent disease. And it's really fun, and we've probably given out over 15,000 copies of this book at this time. It's available too, as you can see, it's available to download on Dr. Jarvie's website. So it's available free of charge for anybody. We also have these TeacherTube videos that go along with it to help. There's songs in it, there's games in it, and that kind of thing. So the TeacherTube videos kind of help teachers see how to teach this. And then the next step was I went into the middle school. So I actually went back into a graduate program at the TCBS program, and I made the rounds. I wanted to pick specific schools because I really wanted to look at how does the slug snail, the invasive slug snail populations change as we move in location and we move up and down elevation. And so I ended up with 5 great partner schools. Up at the top end of the island, we had Kanuoka'aina, my former school that I taught at. Working down the coast, we had Lapahoihoi. That was a mid-elevation school. Waimea was a high-elevation school. Coming down the coast, we had Mountain View, another mid-elevation school. We had Volcano School of Arts and Science, a high-elevation school. And then Kua'okala, which actually was just buried by lava about a week and a half ago. But that was at 17 feet above sea level, so we had a low-elevation school. And what we wanted to do was look at developing an integrated pest management plan for school gardens for controlling invasive slugs and snails, and accompanying curriculum that actually taught the kids enough information, really serious, based on our research, based on real science, deep learning so that they could become educators for their families, for their communities. So it was kind of a train the trainers sort of approach that we took. So we actually now have printed curriculum. All of those lessons that we trialed with the schools there are now into a curriculum, which are also available on our website. And they're aimed at grades 5 through 8, but they can be adapted either way. I've done kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade with these lessons. And when we look at the School Garden Network, it's an existing network. It exists. There's about 300 school gardens around the whole state. And to use this network as a way for educating and a way for getting control, getting the public to control, is really just this great resource. And so it's like, let's use this. I'm really grateful to the School Garden, the Oahu School Garden Hui, the Hawaii Farm to School Hui, for helping really move this forward. So rat lungworm disease, it is serious. It affects health. It affects tourism. It affects agriculture. For the longest time, Hawaii did not want to talk about this disease because they did not want to scare tourists. And that is printed in a journal, that they were afraid to tell people about it because it might affect tourism, it might affect agriculture. Wrong approach. So what we have now is a collaborative project where we're bringing in a lot of resources. We're bringing in agencies, we're bringing in organizations, we're bringing in nonprofits, we're bringing in businesses and individuals. And we're looking at how can we not just address this disease, but how can we also use it to help the students achieve academically what they're supposed to achieve. So the different ways that we see that this can really, aid is, one, it's a way to provide public education for disease prevention. Two, we can hopefully encourage residents to start to control the host animals, because we have higher infection rates in Hawaii than anywhere in the world. And this is very serious. 94% of 545 rats that we trapped in the Hilo area about a year and a half ago, 94% of those were either showing current or previous infection. We have extremely high parasite loads, where just a very, very small piece of tissue from an infected slug or snail can give you a very serious case of rat lungworm disease. So we need host control. And that's not easy to do. It's not easy to get people to want to control these hosts. So hopefully, if we work with the kids and teach them at school how to control, they can go home and start to control. On our island, one of the reasons we think we have such high caseloads is possibly because of the high use of rainwater catchment. That was part of my research too. Drowned slugs, especially the semi-slug, will shed rat lungworm parasites, and they can live for quite a while in a wet environment. So getting this approach going is really important to start to try to prevent disease. And then the other thing that the kids can do is they can be citizen scientists, and they can collect data for us, really important data. We don't know what the population compositions are around the island. When I worked at Kanuoka'aina, the European garden snail was not there. I never saw that snail. When I went back in 2015, 7 years later, to work with that school, they were everywhere. In fact, we removed over 3,000 invasive slugs and snails from that garden, primarily the European garden snail. It was the school with the highest number of pests that we removed. The next highest school we removed a little over 400. 3,000 in one of our most important agricultural areas that provides so much food for the whole state. So finding out who's where, what do we have and who is where, is really important. And then another thing that's really would be great for this is it allows us to detect a new arrival early. The semi-slug used to only be on Oahu and Hawaii Island. When cases on Maui went up, I said, I wonder if the semi-slug's there, put a picture on Facebook, said, anybody on Maui seen this? Yep, there it is. So we see this correlation between the arrival of the semi-slug and an increase in these cases. Kauai does not yet have the semi-slug. To the best of our knowledge, it does not yet have it. And if it does not have it, it needs to keep it out. So if you have kids at school gardens learning how to identify what they have at school, they're going to recognize it if a new one comes in. They're going to recognize it at home. So this is a great way for prevention and early detection. Not only that, it gives a great opportunity to just do some really fun education and use these different pedagogic methodologies that are, been shown to improve student attention, student behavior, student success. You can use it for alternative assessments. The t-shirts that you see here, our kids at Mountain View designed the t-shirt, which is snuggle and juggle your slugs away. So what we use is we use shelters. We were calling them snugglers, where the slugs and snails like dark, cool places. And so we put these shelters where they would come under, and we called them snugglers. And then we used a slug jug, which is basically a high saline concentration water, to put anything that we would capture into this to get rid of it. It kills the slug, it kills the rat lungworm. And they made t-shirts. So a really cool way of, authentic assessment. And then you look at all of the different ways that we can teach around this. It's place-based education. It is aligned with the Hawaii Content and Performance Standards. We right now are working off of a career-connected learning grant through Hawaii Community Foundation up in Waimea. It's got the FAIR features of STEM, framework, authentic assessment, integration, real-world connections. We're bringing the community members in. We want to know, what are consumers' fears? What are the grocers' fears? What are the food vendors' fears? What are the farmers' fears? What are you worried about? How does this impact you? And developing empathy. So design thinking, empathize, define, ideate, come up with ideas, make prototypes and test it. And then again too, the global learner outcomes. These kids do become self-directed learners and community contributors. Citizen science, and then also nahopene a'o, the ha. All of these can be incorporated into this education. Also, you can scaffold it. So if you've got, this education is designed for grades 5 through 8. If you have those grade levels on your campus, you can interact the grades between each other. So for instance, in 5th grade, the 5th graders could be out in the garden collecting the data on their data sheets. They bring that back into the classroom, possibly hand it off to the 7th and 8th graders, who enter it into Google spreadsheets and start to do the statistical analysis. We are using ArcGIS story mapping as a way of reporting. So the students, while they're out in the garden, can be taking pictures, can be writing down journaling of what's going on, what they're seeing. They're collecting data such as, what is the weather? What date is it? What day is it? What was the weather like? What was your rainfall? What species are you finding and how many? Under what trap type did you find them? And so these are things right now, we have no idea what our populations are doing. We don't know why we had 17 cases of rat lungworm last year, and this year we've only had a handful of them. We don't understand the variables that are affecting this disease. And if we get kids collecting this information and entering it into a database that is accessible by researchers can then start to really look at what is going on in Hawaii. We do know that different species, the populations will fluctuate quite a bit. One year, you guys might notice this yourself, one year there might be a whole lot of giant African snails. The next year they're gone and you got a lot of Cuban slugs, and then they're gone and then you have semi-slugs. So they do fluctuate, but there's just so much that we don't know. We don't know why. So getting this data is really crucial for helping us solve this problem for Hawaii. We've got to work on this problem because it is not getting any better. It's gotten worse. So it's interactive. It's three-dimensional and it requires teamwork. We get the students working in teams. We have them going into other classrooms. They go into the younger grades and they help teach them the rat lungworm life cycle. They've done plays, they've made t-shirts, they've written stories, and so it's fun. I have to say that we have a lot of fun doing this education. Around a really kind of creepy disease, we have a lot of fun. And we can, like I said, collect data. And not just data on the slugs, but we can also measure social change. Because there's ways to prevent this. One, yes, wash your food, check your food, cook your food. We're a tropical climate, and in most tropical countries, people cook their food. So we can look at social change. We can look at cultural change. Salads, was that something that Hawaiian people really ate? No. But now it's a big thing. So maybe we need a cultural change. Maybe we need to look at what we're growing and change from lettuce growers to something else that's not so difficult and, you know, one of the more common ways that this disease is transmitted. And of course, then the environmental changes, just looking at your rainfall data, your species changes and that type of thing. And then this is how we tell our stories. So this brings in some of the technology. We're using ArcGIS online story mapping, which is a really great, fun technology. It's available free of charge to all K-12 schools in Hawaii. I think at this point in time, there's only 97 schools in the whole state that are using that technology. It's available through Maui Women in Tech. You can ask to order the software and they'll send it to you. It incorporates the language arts because you have to write about it. I have a story map that I did make on this particular the pilot school project that we did, and if any of you are coming to tomorrow's workshop, we'll go more into depth on that. But there's, you kind of have the story mapping, you actually do tell a story. So there's a great amount of language arts that are incorporated in this, and I really like that part. And it looks really professional. And then the other thing that you can do with the story maps, I'm gonna go back just one, is that you can share them. So when we have our schools that are gonna come on board with this, if they do a story map, you can then publish it. And then anybody can read it. You know, anybody who's in this ArcGIS world can read it. So a school on Kauai can tell us what they found. A school on Hawaii Island can tell us what they found. And we can share stories that way and start to see too, like, what was your challenge? How did you, how did you deal with your challenge? None of this is all set in stone. There's going to be a lot of changes to it because we'll be learning from each other. And so it's dynamic. It's going to change. It really will empower teachers to say, this is really important learning that we're doing. And it's going to help us be able to understand what is going on and what we need to do about it. And then there's some great opportunities for teachers. Really, they look at epidemiology, bringing that into the middle schools and high schools as a great way for doing science and math. You look at Hawaii, and we have a lot of different types of diseases. So there's a lot of great, this is just a template for one disease. We can then move on to something else. Leptospirosis, we can move on to staph, MRSA, dengue, Zika. You go into the foodborne diseases, salmonella, listeria. So these are all things that a school garden now can also start to say, we look at health, yes, the good food we're eating, but we can also look at foodborne diseases that are out there and how do we prevent them. So for teachers who want to get involved in this type of work, more epidemiology, the CDC actually has this great Science Ambassador Fellowship where if you apply and you're chosen, they send you to Washington, D.C. for a week. You work with people at the CDC, you go to their labs, and then they follow you for a whole year so that you can create lessons as well for whatever disease you want to work on. So it's a really great opportunity for teachers. This just came out in the news. This was Dr. Lauren Pang, the epidemiologist for Maui, and he's just been testing these electric strips. They actually came from China. They are used to keep snails in at snail farms where they're raising snails for food. They use these electric fences to keep snails in. So Dr. Pang came to my presentation in Maui a couple years ago and went back and started working with the kids up in Hana, and I forget the other community that he's up there in, Haiku, I think. And they're testing these electric strips. I don't want to see 20 to 30% of farmers go out of business. I don't want to see them go out of business. I love our farmers. So can we come up with solutions? Can we come up with solutions? And this is, again, what we're saying too. Don't just lay the burden on the farmer. We need to educate everyone that if you buy produce at the store, yes, the farmer hopefully did what they could do to keep slugs and snails out. The grocer hopefully did what they could do to make sure the produce was pest-free. And then the consumer has to check as well. So it really, the responsibility does trickle down all the way through. But with ideas like this, we can possibly reduce the risk. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at how many different ways can we approach this problem to start to reduce the risk and to start to reduce the really high infection rate that we're seeing in host animals. So, mahalo to everyone. I really want to give a big mahalo nui loa to Laidi and Debbie Milliken for bringing me over, for really supporting this work, for setting up the workshop for tomorrow. I've worked and worked and worked on this. I can't tell you how grateful I am to you guys to help us really start to use it. So thank you so much, and thank you to all of our funders who's funded this, and thanks you guys for coming. So there you go. Actually, any of them can be carriers. So one of Rob Cowie's studies, in fact, the one that came out that Janie Kim did, they showed that across the range, almost any slug or snail can be a carrier. Some are just better, and it's probably because they're more attracted to rat feces, or they're fast. The semi-slug is fast in the sense of how fast are slugs and snails. It's fast, and it must really like to consume rat feces because they really are very infected. But the African snails also are very infected. The Cuban slugs are infected. So even up on Kohala Mountain, the native snails were infected, which is really sad. So there's a component in here on the impact of invasive slugs and snails on our native snails and on our native plants. They're hard on our native snails. They're really hard on our native plants. They really reduce the regeneration of especially the endangered and threatened plant species. So it's quite an inclusive curriculum. It covers everything from what is integrated pest management to the life cycle of the rat lungworm, including pictures that we take in our labs. So this is very research-based. It gets into, taxonomy, data collection, so it's pretty inclusive. There's 11 lessons in it, including the native plants and snails. No, you cannot get it through a chicken egg or anything like that. Animals that are very prone to it are dogs, horses. The zoo has had animals come down with this. But if chickens don't seem to really be affected and ducks don't, although occasionally my sister's ducks would end up lame and she'd have to kind of put them in a cage for a while and then they'd get better. But it can't be transferred through the eggs. And then the meat you cook. So the big thing is, for prevention, one, check. Like if I'm gonna eat any kind of lettuce, and I don't usually do this at restaurants because I know they can't do it, I put on my glasses and I take any headed vegetable, celery, bok choy, lettuce, apart, leaf by leaf, stalk by stalk, look and wash every one of them individually. And if you don't feel like doing that, freezing works. So I tell people that like green kale smoothies, freeze it for 24 hours. Check and clean first and then freeze it and then cook and you're all good. So, there's definitely ways that we can prevent this. This is not a disease that anybody ever wants to get. I can tell you for a fact, I've known so many people now who have had this disease, and it is not 2 to 8 weeks of recovery by any means. It's years oftentimes, and even then it's not complete. So it's really, really important to take what you need to do everything that you can do to prevent getting this, and then to help control. We all really need to do that part and help control. Like they had the Fight the Bite, we need a Mug the Slug and a Nail the Snail campaign. We really do. Okay, thank you all so much.